It's Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs. Let's start the show with Lewis Tennant. Here we go. The guests and interviews that you're looking for with creators, innovators, and so much more. For all episodes and further info, verbalhighs.com is the place to go.
All right, welcome to Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs. About 5 seconds ago, I hit stop on the intro to episode 70. I'm getting 3 eps up today because it's currently New Year's Eve, and I said I'd get to 26, but haven't quite got there. We're going to be at 22 in the next few hours, but I'm just happy to have kept it up for, I guess, what, season 2, the 2080 run of shows. 2017 was 50. How did he do that? I have no idea, looking back, because it was a way busier year otherwise. Who do I chat to this time round? Well, yesterday I had author and musician Gareth Shute in. The book he's most well known for is A History of Hip-Hop in New Zealand from the late 80s to 2004. So we speak at length about that book as well as his other music-based writing projects. The majority of books he wrote were over, I think, a 4 or 5 year period, and we sort of discussed that as well. There's a how-to guide for making music, which I admit to not having read as I talked to him, and now just when I talked to Jackie Van Beek, not having seen The Breaker-Upperers, which sort of her magnum opus to this point in terms of directing that film. But then in the letterbox, point to this story, in the letterbox a few hours later, as Gareth came over at 9:30 on a Sunday, were brand spanking new copies of Gareth's New Zealand Rock 1987 to 2007. This is the best I can give you from it. Ooh, pagey. And a copy of Making Music in New Zealand, also by Gareth Shute. Similarly pagey, but a different size. If you are going out for New Year's this evening, it's amazing because it means you've listened to this today. Keen listener. If you are post New Year's and it's 2019, how's it looking over there? I've got a good feeling about that year you're in. I'm gonna have a peek at it tomorrow. But you know, I bought an apartment, moving there in April. Hopefully, we'll have full-time work where I've been contract working for nearly the last 10 years. So a few kind of quite growing uppy, lifey things will be falling into place in that year that you're currently enjoying. All right, like the show, Verbal Highs Podcast on Facebook, Verbal Highs on Twitter. Like and subscribe on iTunes. Ladies and germs, Mr. Gareth Shute.
This is Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs.
Yeah, goodness, it's very early. Well, it's not very early, but I mean, it's early to have someone over to seriously talk.
Got the coffee.
On a Sunday.
We'll be all right.
Obviously, neither of us are church-going folk.
No. Apparently not.
And I'm guessing this might be a symptom of you having not a small child now. How old's your son?
5-year-old son.
Yeah.
So it's harder to squeeze things in.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming. I learnt that because, you know, as you do, I was doing a little bit of reading about you, and I notice, you know, happens with a number of writers, the child and family related stories start slipping in, and I read the one about trying to build a tree house.
Yeah.
Is it still standing?
No, I took it apart and made it into a crappy plane. So the crappy playhouse is now a crappy plane.
Did you have any building skills before that?
No, I sort of had anti-building skills, but I purposely wanted to do it with like a non-electric saw and stuff, so my son could build the thing with me. So he made this very Dr. Seussian, uneven looking wonky thing.
Oh, I hope you painted it suitably Dr. Seussian.
Oh, well, it had blackboard paint on one side so we could change the decor.
Yeah.
And yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I had a thing at the beginning of the year where I was thinking, I should try and write for every section of the spin-off. And so I wrote for 3 or 4, and then they kept adding new sections.
Yeah.
Like they added like a cooking one this year, and then they had the like Māori section, and yeah, it soon became apparent that was a silly idea.
So if I pick
yeah.
something that, like, I'm not saying I don't know whether you are or are not into said topic, but like, let's say I've never seen you write about sport. So if you chose sport for the spin-off, I guess you'd find some kind of like music or soundtrack based approach too. Did you write for the sports section?
The one time I wrote for the sports section, it was a song about, or it was a story about songs about sport and why they're usually kind of terrible, and as the shtick of the story, I actually wrote my own song for the All Blacks to sort of say why it's hard to write a song that's about sports, and talked about all the different examples and how it's just kind of a painful kind of combination.
What makes them whack?
Wow. It's kind of cliched language, that's one thing. You immediately fall into all these sports cliches. And you end up just with high-paced kind of, like metal or something. Some of the good ones are by bands I sort of hate, like the Red Hot Chili Peppers, LA Lakers one is probably, if you like them, it's probably quite a good song because they're like hits on the floor tom are kind of like basketball bouncing, and it kind of, the terrible rapping style kind of suits it.
You got me thinking now, the only one I can, this is pretty obscure too, the only one I can think of off the top of my head is Dizzy Rascal in that World Cup song.
Oh, yeah.
Did you come across that?
Well, they do a lot of English. The English in their soccer ones.
Yeah.
There's, the New Order, Love's Got the World in Motion. And then, the Neil Finn one's quite good. Neil Finn and Tim Finn both wrote a song each. Tim Finn wrote one for cricket.
Okay.
And Neil Finn wrote one for the rugby. But in the end, I wrote my one, and it was terrible, of course. And I think it was a terrible idea for a story as well, because music fans didn't want to read about sports, and sports fans didn't really think writing a song for the All Blacks or being really nerdy about music was a good idea. So it's kind of like a story that no one wanted to read. So that was a great idea.
Hold that thought. I'll ask you that about, you just made me, something occurred to me about the spin-off, which I'll ask in a second. But I will say who's sitting with me, ladies and gentlemen. This is Gareth Shute, a writer and musician who writes regularly for said spin-off publication.
Audio Culture.
And Audio Culture. He's also published a number of non-fiction books about the arts in New Zealand, particularly local music. Arguably the best known of which is the hip hop history up to about 2004.
Yep.
He has toured the UK, Europe, and Australia, and UK is Europe. I wish I hadn't stolen this copy from somewhere else. As a member of bands such as the Brunettes, or maybe not actually. Is this is post Brexit? Stay on track, Lewis. The Ruby Sons, and has hands-on experience which shapes the scope of his writing. Welcome, sir.
Thanks.
Now to the spin-off. It just made me think that site, it does seem sort of like writer idea driven a lot of the time. Is it analogous to how you'd pitch a TV show or whatever? Do you just pitch an article and does the editor decide, or do they ask for certain content? If
you're freelance, then it's your idea to pitch stories. I think they are very good in the modern media environment because they understand how to do a heading or like a story idea that pulls you in without being too clickbaity. It's like a real hard balance. And I did find I had one story I did in there. It was like, what's still good to recycle? And I thought that heading was quite good, and I did special photos to make it seemed like a cool thing to do to recycle, or like trying to make it look a little crafty. I don't know. I had an idea, and then Stuff actually picked up the article and reprinted it. Yeah. And they took away the heading, reused all the photos, and used these like stock images. And it was kind of like, you kind of missed the point of like the article in a weird way. Right. And then I got to see the real Stuff comments, which was another thing where you take your blinkers off, where you see, we just burn all our rubbish, and a great mass of humanity.
So how are Stuff allowed to do that? Is there some reciprocal arrangement?
Yeah, Spin-Off's quite good at doing that as well, where they trade articles, or they have an arrangement with like RNZ where they republish some of theirs and have a back and forth reciprocal arrangement, or they just are open-minded if it's not going to be skin off their nose. Like I wrote one on the New Zealand country singer Kylie Bell, who's actually a much bigger in Australia and making a dent in America as well. And that was republished in like a country magazine in Australia. the spin-off was just like, okay, I mean, that was a print magazine, so
Yeah.
it's kind of like not the same
It's
audience
funny
at
how
all.
you point out such a particular, but now you make me think about it, important part of sort of publishing and web presence and so on, because you were kind of saying that their subbing's really good in a way, assuming that's who writes things like the the titles and the teasers, and
they do redo some of the headings, and they usually do a better job.
they've got in other words, they've got a real sense of kind of their identity. And although I guess in someone like Stuff's defence, they're always going, I shouldn't say lowest common denominator, but they're kind of more like drift net fishing than
That's
something
true.
like the spin-off.
I mean, Stuff is an amazing machine. It's so big on the media landscape. It's insane, and
The
it's
quality
impressive.
of their gear and parts has got a lot better in the last year or two as well. There's some good feature writing, and
Their climate change series has been really good, and they've been experimenting with the form a little bit. I mean, that's what I'm more interested in now. Like, people always ask me when I'm going to do another book, but I'm kind of more interested at the moment in what online writing can be, and so that's kind of come out in the projects I've worked on this year, the big ones for audio culture. Like, I did a timeline of New Zealand hip hop, and I did a map of Auckland music venues in the 60s and 50s and 60s to try and have things that people could engage with but not turn them off. I think the trick is, like, people go to a site like that expecting to read, and then if you put too much video in between or other kinds of experience, or like things, interactive things they really have to toy around with, sometimes it turns people off. Like, it's sort of, I came here to read an article, I don't want to like search around an infographic too much, or so it's kind of a balancing
So
act.
you're trying to find that balance? Yeah, because everything I've done for audio culture, I've approached more like exactly like a traditional journalist. Like, they add the images and a bit of video at the bottom and stuff, but I've actually written some quite long form kind of text heavy stuff for them.
Yeah, well, I mean, people...
They're labours of love, right? Like, if you get a topic, it's like, I could do this in 800 words, but here's 3,500 because I want to get this right,
Well, it's a balance, isn't it? I mean, the sheer fact that they have video and audio embeds on the page where you can listen to music and watch the videos just makes it immediately different than a book where you have to spend all this time describing it. But, I mean, it's great to look at my most popular articles on there. Like, I did one on hardcore music in New Zealand, and Auckland and Hamilton, and the average time on page is almost half an hour. It's just like insane amount of time on page. So people are reading these.
Where are you getting that? Where are you getting that data from? I'd love that data for my articles.
Well, we can discuss that afterwards.
I know that. Are you working?
Yeah, I'm on the board for audio culture. So every few months I meet up and we discuss what's going to be on audio culture and what new things we could do.
Oh, let's make this about me. Now, the first article I wrote, I think some people at the time, not anti by any means, but I think Simon had to push a little for the sort of importance of the DJ stuff, and I wrote about a guy, Clint Smiley, who had a terrible health turn early 2000s, and I remember Simon saying that changed a few people's perspectives immediately because it had like a huge amount of hits at the time, considering how early the site was.
Yeah,
so it's interesting what connects, eh?
Yeah, I mean, you want to tap into a community with audio culture stories if you can. Like, it's great when you can do more of a story on a scene or someone central to a scene that sort of unwraps the whole moment in time, or like the ones I did on Severe or DLT were really, especially the early paragraphs were all just like all these old names that people hadn't heard for 20 years and stuff, like groups they'd come up around and parties they'd played at with them and stuff.
What I'm quietly proud of with mine is that there has been no kind of book written. A lot of the stuff I've written about is kind of just pre the internet really hitting in New Zealand. So even a footprint of writing or reviews about whatever at the time, isn't online. Like the sound system sort of history of the beginning of reggae sound system culture. I mean, that was delivered to me orally, and if it wasn't done, if someone, particularly Dubhead, who I sort of, I used as the main building block of the piece, if someone hadn't got that out of him, it won't be written anywhere,
Yeah, I mean, that's why it's good that Dubhead is working on that book on the history of local reggae and hope.
Is he though? Patrick, are you Patrick?
Because the same with the hip hop book I wrote, it was sort of not written about much at the time. It was still just kind of not taken too seriously, and so there weren't enough articles. And then when you went back, it was kind of like, there's not enough information for a book, so you really had to go and interview people. So it's good that someone's doing that for reggae, because reggae is, there's massive lacuna in music writing around reggae. So I read your sound system piece, and that's was really eye-opening. And there's so much. There's not really even a good history of Catch a Fire. Like, I was researching them the other day, and I was like, man, this is so patchy and huge.
A lot of New Zealanders don't realise, because I just heard you talking about how Savage's success isn't as known perhaps by as many New Zealanders as it should be, but similar thing, like Catch a Fire in Hawaii and sort of and a couple of areas of the States, they're huge, aren't they? They're a big band.
Someone like Sammy J, even more so, like, just so huge. I think as well they are big in small town New Zealand in a way that is hard to quantify, but a young reggae star like Israel Starr can tour from town to town. He was saying to me he can tour everywhere, because he can play like an hour and a half's drive down the road and play another place and then play another place. Like, his tours.
You got me thinking. The other thing with reggae is that it sort of works generationally in New Zealand. Like, you easily get 3 generations would go out to a reggae gig. It's got that kind of timeless crossover. Let's talk about the hip hop book, because you were actually an aspiring fiction writer, weren't you?
I was, my wayward late 20s, and
but you must have had some. I'm not saying you couldn't do it without this, but I'm assuming you had some background in research, or perhaps postgrad study, or
I was both wanting to be a fiction writer and hanging around university way too long. And coming out of a long-term-ish relationship that suddenly kind of turned the world on its head, and suddenly everything seemed a bit more possible, or like,
doors closed, doors open.
So I went to this talk, I guess it was part of the Writers' Festival at Aotea Centre, and I saw P Money talk and talking about the history, and I was like, wow, this is gonna explode. And I'd loved hip hop since I was a young child, and I guess I'll cram this all in.
Plenty of time, mate. Breathe.
So in the 80s, late 80s, 80s, I lived in Singapore as a child, and so the people in my apartment block were like African American kid, Hispanic kid, then there was also like a Chinese kid, an Indian kid from England, and we all formed like a hip hop crew, and we watched those early Beat Street and Breakdance the movie, and taught ourselves how to breakdance, and got into those early Grandmaster Flash and the things on the Beat Street soundtrack. Ice-T was on the breakdance soundtrack. So I was into hip hop from a surprisingly young age, and then came back to New Zealand and was kind of on my own in that, but was like really fascinated to discover there was a New Zealand music.
So when did you get back here?
Late
80s, early 90s.
Well, I don't know. High school was more like 90s, I guess.
You're a couple of years older than me, so I started high school in 89. I guess you'd be an 87, 88 to start high school.
Yeah, something like that.
By the way, before you go on, that changes what I thought about Singapore. I thought they had really draconian censorship laws. It surprises me you were hearing stuff like Ice-T over there. Is that some kind of myth on my part?
Well, there was both. On one hand, you'd go to the cinema and all the swear words would be cut out, and the whole scenes of the movie would be cut out. But then on the other hand, you'd have this guy who'd come around to your house to rent you VHSs, and just had a whole bag, and he didn't know really what they were, and so he'd just say, these are the sci-fi ones, and so I'd end up watching the weirdest kind of movies because they were like supposedly sci-fi, but they're like, some of them were way too old for me or whatever, you know. I saw some...
But then the music side of things, similar censorship, or where were you getting?
Well...
you're saying just that stuff on film, so there wasn't a lot of music available.
Well, there's heaps of pirated cassettes as well, so, you know, I spent my whole life at these pirated kind of stores where all the cover was kind of printed, and then there'd be a photograph. Someone had took the cover and then cut out with scissors the picture of the cover and glued it onto this generic kind of case. And I'd search for, like, Split Enz was like my main childhood band, so I'd be searching for them. But yeah, then I got all the hip hop ones, and just anything with breakdance on the cover, then I end up just buying. But a lot of it was electro. That was the other weird thing that people kind of forget. People did breakdance to hip-hop or rap music like 25% of the time, and the rest of the time they were listening to this odd...
It's close enough. It's got, as you know, it's got links. But so it's been too long on this, like a dog with a bone, but so the necessity for piracy and so on was cultural censorship, right? Not just that stuff wasn't getting imported. It was, if all the swear words were edited out of the films and so on.
I guess so. Yeah. So I think it was just poor, you know, licensing laws there that allowed them to get away with it, and
So you get to New Zealand, and I mean, would you? I mean, was Upper Hutt Posse wouldn't have been enough in the general public eye, would they, back then, for you to have discovered them? Or?
I think I taped that song when it was replayed on whatever Radio with Pictures or whatever at some point, and then. Yeah, it was mostly through videotaping music videos. But I did end up seeing a few bands live, like Leaders of Style, when they supported Headless Chickens, or which was before they became Up Up Posse, or I saw Lost Tribe at university and was really into all those ones, and Sisters Underground I saw play at like a daytime kind of event. So, yeah, I managed to go and see a lot of those sort of formative acts. Yeah. But it was tricky.
It sounds similar. And, people forget how, I think, important those orientation tours are. Eh? Like I saw artists that I just would not have seen without that support of that university touring circuit.
It was bizarre seeing Lost Tribe play at Shadows, you know, and there was only a small kind of audience there, but Johnny Sagala, who used to be one of them, was like such a showman. He got out in the audience and was doing like the Running Man and stuff. He's like such a star. I could never understand why he wasn't more famous. His like solo single was really great too.
So that's it's still a lot, good few years to the till the book. And so are you like a sort of voracious collector of what you can find New Zealand wise?
Yeah, sadly it was all just CDs, really.
Yeah.
Those are the set of CDs I still have. There's all my hip-hop CDs, local hip-hop CDs. How
do we go with this? You know, you're basically going from punter to sort of quite, writer of quite an important book. So how does it come about?
Yeah, it was a huge leap. It's kind of funny to think back that I had the guts to kind of do it, because at the same time that was when I first joined a band as well. It was quite a weird little year there, 2003 I guess, and so I just pitched the book to Reed Publishing as it was then, and they got a bit of interest, but then I did hear back that someone at one of the meetings was at the publisher was like, hip-hop fans can't read and things like that. But I think once I put the word hip-hop and rap music in people's minds, they just kept seeing it everywhere. It's kind of like if you buy an orange car and then you see a bunch of oranges cars. I
see a lot of Subaru Imprezas around for sure.
And they started to get the sense, wait a minute, maybe he's right. Maybe this is about to explode. And so it's just, I could still like... But the great thing was, because it was just pre it exploding, you'd have things like P Money would just give me the phone number for Scribe, and I just rang Scribe on his cell phone number and talked to him over the phone for an hour. And
see, that's interesting you saying before it exploded. Like, I lived in Melbourne at the time, but I thought in terms of, like you're saying, they suddenly started seeing those two words put together everywhere. It was already getting a lot more coverage than it had the century before. The whole early 2000s was quite a... was it just another level after 2004, 2005?
Yeah, I mean, this is 2003, I guess, when I made 2002, 2003, when I made the book. And so there was Nesian Mystic and Shute, who were kind of huge and had proved that it could be big. And then P Money's solo album.
And Bill as well, I think.
Totally.
Yeah.
King Kapisi as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, they were amazing albums. Like, I used to volunteer at the Auckland City Mission at that time, and the only things you could play on the stereo and everyone was happy was like Bob Marley, Shute, or King Kapisi. Like, there's like a very limited crossover. The sweet spot.
Yeah.
Especially Shute and Bob Marley. It's kind of funny. They're kind of like...
that generational thing I talked about again.
Yeah, connected in people's minds. But yeah, so I pitched the book. They said, I'll do a sample chapter. I did a sample chapter. They said, okay, cool, let's go ahead with it. And so I just started from the beginning, interviewed, D-Word.
So he's,
Takupu.
he can be notoriously difficult if he wants to be, as well as, extraordinarily helpful and insightful. And by your own mission, you had, I saw somewhere you said you had no kind of connection to the scene in terms of, hey, it's Gareth, can you chat to me? So was he open to the process?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you...
Or did you sort of have to, do some kind of initiation or... Yeah.
Well, I mean, it was starting at the beginning, knowing that I'd started with him, like he was one of the first interviews I did.
Yeah.
And then once I'd talked to him, everyone else was like, oh, you did start at the beginning.
Right,
so people, you kind of gain respect through knowing the order of things to be done. I rang him.
Well, also just that he gave you his time is probably like people, once someone with mana gives their time to a project, you would like with this, once I had a few guests up, people were like, oh yeah, okay, what an interesting list of names,
Yeah, I mean, it was funny. I mean, I rang him and I had this whole project on my shoulders by that stage, and so I phoned him and then he didn't answer, and he didn't answer again, and I was just like, almost had a breakdown. I was just like, what am I doing? I can't do this. And so I had to no, I can totally do this, and phoned him back, and then he just talked freely for an hour and a half and told me everything I need to know. And the fact I'd already done research, I think, always helps. Once people realise, you've already... You're not
a chancer, to use that great British expression.
You're not just coming in with no knowledge and no idea of... for him, the fact I knew some of the politics as well, like I'd read Huey Newton Seize the Time and had a knowledge of that stuff, made it a good conversation. Though,
I was thinking with that album and with Etu and so on, it's I don't know if lucky's the right word, but it's great that was the first hip hop release, like something so sort of like a hackneyed word but conscious, What if it had been some sort of terrible you know what I mean? Some sort of terrible like facsimile of America at the time.
What were they going to release? I think that's the beat maybe, or they were going to release Basketball or one of those sort of poppy tracks off the album. Like that's what was suggested to them. I'm sure that George Hubbard probably thought that was the better idea, their manager. But yeah, I'm glad they knew what they were doing.
How do you decide on parameters? I mean, all research, whether for a popular audience or specialised audience, you need parameters, and you kind of need a thesis, I guess. So it was like a general history of that period, and then did you have to sort of decide on what artists to put in, or did that easily fall into place?
I mean, I could have, I soon thought I should have done it different ways. Once it comes out for a year, you're always rethinking who you should have put in. Like I could have covered Manuel Bundy more, or this, that and the other. Though some of the people I thought I should have covered more at the time did end up disappearing off the face of the earth. So it's always a hard pick. Oh, and breaking records was another thing I could have covered more. I did mention it, but I didn't really talk to anyone from that camp, but I came to respect that stuff more. But I would sometimes, go back, like the next book when I did Making Music in New Zealand, I went and interviewed Cyphernetic and got quotes from him, or, you get a second whack at it if you manage to do another book, I guess. But yeah, and then so the book did well. I went through and interviewed everyone, and I did have the idea of kind of shoving some politics into it and some wider scope for why it was important. So it's true, I did have like a kaupapa behind why I was writing it, or and then it won the book award in New Zealand, which I think was, at the same time as Scribe was exploding, and they were doing, the Boost Mobile tour and having TV ads with rappers on it, and it was just so massive. And
it was a hip hop renaissance.
Yeah, it was crazy. Just the timing of it was so.
The summit was
perfect.
happening around that time as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, the summit had turned into, from just a small thing in a hall in Christchurch to a 3-day event at the town hall. And so, and Severe was doing gigantic tours as well. Like I think one of his major Flavours ones had a show at St James. Like, it was so big, and his compilations were selling massive amounts, and then started selling massive amounts in Australia, which is another thing I don't think people understand quite how massive he was. He caught the tail end of selling physical copies, and it was those compilations. They were huge over there. Yeah, multi-platinum in Australia, which is, far
numbers.
more than than platinum is in this country.
With here, not with here. Sorry, excuse me. With publishing, it's an area of the arts I know little about, kind of business wise. Getting a publishing deal and so on, is this still like a labour of love you're working on, outside your kind of paid work, or did you get some financial support as you worked on it?
No, I am still quite terrible at applying for funding for my writing. Yeah. So I've never got funding for any of my books. So a publishing
deal just means we'll put your book out. It doesn't mean we'll pay you a retainer while you write it.
Small advance, but that's, just something that comes off your royalties at the end of the day. So it's just like, do you want your money now or later? So I was working 3 days a week at the Avondale Library and living in Kingston. Yeah. And so I'd go to gigs till the middle of the night, and with my ex-girlfriend's film camera that had no flash, I would take photos of whatever hip-hop acts I could catch.
So all the photos in the book are yours as well? Yeah,
at least probably 3/4 of them, I guess.
Yeah. Interest in photography beforehand, or just necessity bred?
Necessity, and then actually being forced to not use a flash and using just high-speed black and white gave it a certain image. And then my other lucky thing was this chap, Steve Russell, who was working at Reed Publishing at the time, the designer. He was just doing cookbooks and gardening books that he was bored by, and he was the most massive hip-hop fan. And then one day this hip-hop book landed on his desk, and so he just went crazy. And suddenly he went from the designer they were struggling to get to
motivated,
do his work, to get motivated into the most motivated designer who's pulling late nights and doing massive things. And then he did one spread of CDs lined up that must have taken him so long. He drew all the CDs kind of by hand, and I was just like, oh, that doesn't look very good. And he's like, okay, we'll scrap it. But knowing that it probably took him a day of solid work at least. So he just went crazy.
Sorry.
His success in the years since has just shown what a star he was, and kind of unappreciated. He didn't even win the designer at that year's book awards.
You got me thinking. Never mind your journalistic and your written content. Yeah, the layout and the photos in that book. Would you call it like a coffee table book? But the fact that it had, that would have been a large part of its appeal. It would not have been. It would not have been the same book, text only.
It was crazy how he. I would have 6 blurry, dark photos of Scribe that I took too late at night that they're all just a bit blurry
Yeah.
to use, and then he'd just put all 6 of them next to each other, and you'd see almost a motion across the page, and so he'd save these photos and turn it into something amazing.
The blur look intentional.
Yeah, and so he went on to do, a book on, I don't know, the Jacksons. I know is one book he's done. He's done one on Blue Note.
Wow.
So he's in the UK doing these amazing books.
And it sounds like you
Hip Hop Raised Me was another one he did. Actually.
Sold a number of copies, did you? It was a successful book by New Zealand publishing standards.
Yeah, it was. That was the irony, really. It sold quite well, and then I presented my next book idea, and Reed Publishing was like, "No, it's not a very good book idea." So I had to scout around again and got signed to Random House, and then the book got nominated for a book award. So I went with my old publisher to the book awards. It won, and then they're like,
"Is this making music in New Zealand?"
The
first
hip hop book.
Yeah.
Won at the book awards, and so then my old publisher was like, "Oh, we probably should have taken that second book." So, oh well, too late now, and they had to, they ended up repressing
a bit of
it.
vindication for you.
Yeah, and so it all ended up the same. They all ended up the same publishing company in the end, because Reed was bought out by Penguin, and then Penguin and Random House combined. So the 3 publishers I've worked with are now one.
It's like how there's basically one major record label now. It's turning the same way in publishing, is it? Has there been? I mean, I guess it was kind of a garish question, really. Like did it sell well? Because obviously that's not the importance of the book. Are there? Have you come across a similar book for other kind of non-American countries? Have other people done the hip hop in Germany 19 whatever it is to?
Not sure. I mean, it's it was also you say Severe got in on the end of selling CDs. I got on the end of selling books, and so I ended up doing 4 with proper publishers. And the last one, the NZ Rock one, I definitely felt the end of publishing being upon us, or like the global financial crisis was a great time to release a $50 book, but it had a lot of problems. I guess at the same time, I was living in a crappy flat at the top of Sandringham Road, paying like $50 a week rent or whatever, and some other musicians. Well, I wasn't even a musician really, but Jonathan Bree and Scott Mannion from Little Chief Records ended up moving in downstairs at the same time as I was writing the hip hop book, and Scott needed a bass player, and he was like, "Oh, do you play anything?" And I was like, "I used to play guitar at high school," so I ended up joining his band, the Toki Tones. So I had another current where I was like playing as a musician in the local scene doing these books.
That's very punk. It's like do you play bass? I probably could, because I used to play guitar years ago.
So the drummer took me out. We looked in the Trade and Exchange, and there was something advertised as a violin bass, and it was like, oh, that sounds interesting. Could be like Paul McCartney-esque. So I went and bought this crappy bass for $300, which is the one I used right through my middling bass player career.
Are you still playing a bit?
I play in a 2-piece called Fever Party
bass
now. Guitar now.
Okay, so you picked up. So that led you picking up guitar again.
Well, yeah, I played guitar in the Ruby Sons, so that was just Ryan was middling around from the Ruby Sons, and he got pulled into the Brunettes when Nick from Shocking Pinks quit the band suddenly just a week before they were going to go on tour in Australia, and so Ryan got thrown into our midst, and he was, I remember him having his 21st, so he's a little younger, and he started the Ruby Sons. I turned up, and he's like, I've got this other guy who wants to play in the band, we'll just organise who's going to play what at his studio. So we went out, and there's this guy Mark Stebbin who used to be in the band Leonard, and it was his studio, and he was standing there with his bass, and I was like, oh, I guess he's playing bass. And it's like, well, you can play guitar and do some percussion and do this and do that. It's like, oh, well, I did.
You're like the tambourine player in the Dandy Warhols. Have you seen Dig?
Yeah.
So if the book, because I'm sure people have said, there should be a part 2, there should be a part 2, but if there was to be a 2005 till now, this is broad, but what are the key things to say about hip hop in New Zealand from 2005 to now, since you put the book out?
There's been some massive.
He's paraphrased 13 years.
The change.
Well, Tom Scott would have to go in there.
Yeah, well, okay, let's grab let's say three threads. Yeah. One would be just how much hip-hop's become part of popular music now. Yeah. So you can have someone who, like Savage, who we discussed before, who jumped over and now releases stuff through Ministry of Sound, which is kind of a dance music label, and his shows are him DJing with a laptop and then rapping, and he's in a DJ kind of position,
and he's playing big kind of EDM monster
big
tracks.
Clubs. Yeah. He's making ridiculous songs like Freaks, whatever it's got now.
Yeah,
hundreds of millions of streams on Spotify, and then one of the other songs he jumped on, I think Push, was on the synced for an ad during the Super Bowl and stuff like that, so you could hear his voice yelling in the ad break of the Super Bowl. And this handful of really large international acts now would be one part of the narrative. Yeah, then, so like just the amount pop music and hip hop are the same thing now, where it's kind of weirdly just blended. And then another one would be the online side of it. So you've got, that's got its own threads, but Tom Scott and Homebrew, how they came up through releasing stuff, giving stuff away free is so different.
Yeah.
And, just having that personal connection with their audience, where they did those little videos where they do
so the Auckland bedroom scene that led to Young, Gifted and Broke, and how the internet kind of hooked a lot of those guys up initially.
Yeah, and that they drew on previous eras of musicians as well through Tom's dad. And then I guess I'm just randomly picking a third thread.
I've just totally put you on the spot.
Another third thread would be SoundCloud and the trap scene and stuff like that, which is really not in the consciousness of people in New Zealand, but has people like Montel.
What do you mean it's not in the consciousness of people in New Zealand? Do you mean that the artists making stuff here are big on SoundCloud and so on globally? Or I don't quite know what you mean.
Yeah, and SoundCloud's kind of passed over as the medium of exchange or the spot for people, but it's all kind of blossomed out of that scene where people can be producing on some massive things from overseas, Montel doing stuff with massive rappers, or LMC is another one, and I don't think many people in New Zealand really hear of them, but then they're working with these rappers whose albums go massively to the top of the chart. It's hard to keep track in general across music at people's success now.
There's a Kiwi trap dude that's huge in LA now. I forget his name. That made me think about you approached it from sort of a light-hearted angle. I think on the spin-off you basically decided to switch the radio on and see how much New Zealand music each station was playing, because for those who don't remember, one of the sort of earliest coups or successes of the we need more New Zealand music getting exposed was I think play raised from about 2% to about 20% in the 90s. And you found very little getting played. But just before I get to talking about that more specifically, you talking about how an artist can quietly be, making waves overseas and people don't know now. Like, where does that leave New Zealand Music Month? Is it just something we do now because we've done it all these years? Or
I have kind of mixed feelings about it, I guess. I did a talk that's probably still online somewhere with Duncan Grieve and Joe Nunwick and Karen Dass about New Zealand Music Month, where they were just basically saying it shouldn't exist anymore and it's irrelevant, though I think I convinced Duncan that it might still have some use, and my argument was more that at a high school level you really need to be opening people's minds to New Zealand music as a thing still. And so it's really about just getting the young people into it. And then if you have an ability to throw some money the way of local venues and support those things as well, then I think that's important. And, you know, the other stuff the New Zealand Music Commission does, like the Going Global thing, where they try and give New Zealand artists a sense of the international scene and how to connect to it and give them access to people. So there's a lot of work you can still do to promote New Zealand music without it being what New Zealand Music Month used to be, which, partly was just about getting New Zealand music on radio. I mean, what I found in that article, it wasn't really that New Zealand music isn't played on radio. It's just not played on certain types of radio. I think on pop radio it was amazingly represented because of Robinson and because of Broods. Like we've got amazing pop acts at the moment.
Yeah, we are.
And Robinson is like huge, and there's probably more. I mean, there's plenty more like Saskia and stuff, and all the people that Josh Diamond and the Jason. Jason Suskoff.
So we get two forensic about this, but there is an argument now that even more so than 20 years ago, however long New Zealand Music Week started, that there's more of a canon of work for every style of station. I could fill up a classic hits station with some Kiwi bangers, man.
Yeah, I think.
Are you texting?
Oh, I'm just researching something.
Okay. I thought, oh my God, I'm losing him. Oh, you're looking for the name of something. Are you live tweeting?
His name. Anyway.
I mean, I could fill up a classic rock playlist with because I was thinking like, when it used to be New Zealand Music Week on Active, when I did shows, if you did an electronic show, there was like one compilation. There was Harmonic 695, and there was kind of like 3 other albums. So there is, by virtue actually probably of the success of things like New Zealand Music Week, I think there's enough in each genre to fill that. I think maybe just since, so it is about keeping that message firm, I guess, because I guess like sort of since the heat went off, because there was actually heat on those stations. They were years ago they were waving the threat of. Like a government-funded youth station, things like that, made commercial radio kind of police itself. You must know that side of the story.
Well, there is. One I didn't include. I think the Magic is the classic hit station that actually does play a lot of New Zealand music. So I checked that out afterwards when someone pointed it out, and it was like, oh. Yeah, it's just totally easy to play classic hits with New Zealand songs, and like these other stations are being
Freddy's,
so lazy.
Freddy's is classic now.
Yeah, well,
Dragon.
It's amazing what's classic. There's so much.
Herbs, I could go on for days.
Yeah,
remember the Kiwi Gold discs. There's some gold on those Kiwi Gold discs.
Well, there's.
You had an irate program director contact you after that article, didn't you?
Yeah, someone from an unnamed station.
Yeah.
He took me on the Facebook post for the spin-off, and I, in some ways, sympathised, I suppose. Yeah. I didn't want to, I wanted to just have a conversation, but he came in quite hot, and so I did end up disputing some of his points, and then he just deleted the whole thread, so I guess I take that as a win.
Yeah, that's always that. I think that is.
Conversation dispute. Okay, so what I was checking was, I said, I meant Josh Fountain and Jason Suskoff from Leisure were the names I was struggling to say earlier. From Leisure as being other important kind of new Joel Littles on the scene that I feel like could produce even more pop gold.
Where do you think Lord's going to go next?
Well, I think she's actually at a good level. I think going down a step from what Raw's was is probably a more sane level of fame to be at.
Yeah.
And I think her role model of David Bowie is quite a good one, and that's kind of how she works. Like, I listened to the Song Exploder she did, which I recommend. It's a podcast which she
deconstructs one of her tunes.
Yeah, and the way she brings in musicians for sounds she wants rather than playing herself, she's like, I want these sort of horns. I know a guy who does these horns for pop tracks. I'll just bring them in and he can just put them on. I want this kind of rapping. I want this. And so she builds the elements of a song through musicians kind of like collaging them together.
She's got that... She's at that level where she can do that. I need this, and it will come. I mean, obviously, I jest slightly here, but if it all went tits up for her, she's got the house in Ponsonby, and I think in our current financial climate, I mean that's success, isn't it?
Well, I mean, actually, at a level,
it's my life's work to get a house.
A level of the song like Royals, you could just live off that one song. I mean,
off the Royals teas.
Royals teas.
Sorry. Yeah. Try the veal. I'm here to win.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the How Bizarre or Something in the Water by Brooke Fraser, I'm sure is the same. Or
what did you think of Simon's book on Paulie?
Well, I mean, I think he was very honest about his perspective on the whole thing.
Yeah.
I'm sure Paulie's family had
a great choice of words. He was very honest about his perspective on things, and that's all you can only have is your truth, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of Simon Gregg. And
Same.
I
It's an
think
extraordinarily well-written book.
I think, actually, if people want to know about the music scene, they should read that book and the Sweetwater's book and have a think about
Sweetwater's book?
The guy who got in big trouble trying to put on Sweetwater's in the late 90s.
Keeley wrote his own book. Okay.
And it's just, the gangs wanting to do security and all the kind of murky side of the music scene.
One of the most amazing parts of that story I heard, I was down a old RNZ footage rabbit hole at some point, started listening to a couple of interviews with him, and he spoke about how, I think he said something like they knew the gangs had sort of taken it over even, a couple of weeks out or something like that. I'm not going to get this quite right, but he didn't quite know the extent of it, turned up to his own gig, kind of just saw what was happening at the gate, saw that it was none of his staff, and he basically said that he and his wife turned the car around, went to the property they had in the Coromandel and just waited there till the end of the show. Like it had got that away on him. Yeah. That he the car around at his own gig. I'll have to read that book.
I mean, there's another. Yeah, I mean, there's a darker side to the New Zealand music history that could be unearthed, but why?
It's a tough country to do something like that, and I think by virtue of numbers, I've thought, and there's so many contexts to that, different levels of how people open up on podcasts and so on. Like we often sort of close ranks about certain things, and I think it's just size. You just bump into people, and I mean, Simon Griggs, for example, is someone who knows where all the bodies are buried. There was some anger.
He's very good about keeping.
There were some people very angry with him about that book.
Oh, I'm sure.
It's being privy to a couple of conversations.
Get that story down. I mean, I'm sure a more sympathetic to Paulie version of events could be done, but because he was such a fish out of water in that situation. But
it's fascinating.
It's more interesting to read how difficult things can get and all the conflicting things that are coming to play.
You say we don't need to do that and stuff, and but people do love the dirt. I was thinking just literally, I read that Motley Crue book recently, and the dark side of life fascinates us all.
I thought you wonder how far back. I mean, it's good with audio culture. They try and just keep to the positive.
Yeah.
Where possible. And I think Simon Gregg, I did jokingly suggest to him at some point, maybe I should interview about all this other stuff, and then when you die, I'll publish it. Or maybe when everyone mentioned
when I talked to Kyan for his just an article about Kyan. Obviously, Kyan is. I don't think he quite realised what the site was, and so he sort of tales of something. What was the line drinking this big bottle laced with acid, and then I'm right next to this big fucking pipe organ in the town hall, and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And then he okayed it all because I you don't officially have to do that, but I always send the person
Yeah,
the
I do
article.
too.
And then when he realised sort of where it had ended up and how permanent he was, it's not like I'm saying it's nothing to do with like where the bodies are buried.
Yeah.
He was like, shit, that was quite candid. But I said, well, I did run it by you.
Yeah, I always wonder where the level is.
Yeah. But I think people, like I say, I think people people appreciate honest stories,
I do recommend the Shapeshifter story on audio culture. I can't remember who wrote it.
That is good.
I
think Martin might have written that.
Yeah, that's got some funny,
Yeah.
funny, honest bits. Or that documentary, was it? Maybe the Herald or stuff did a documentary on Rhythm and Vines.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, that was another one that had like a whole... Oh, this isn't so friendly anymore. There's a lot of money, and some people are losing money, some people are making money.
It's funny you say that, Gareth. I tried to get so many people to watch that, and they're like, I don't want to advice. I'm like, watch it, man. It's actually a really well-made doco, and they gave a real... I thought whoever made it was really diplomatic with giving, sort of both those guys' perspective on the gig. It didn't sort of take sides.
Yeah.
So the reading between the lines was sort of like one of them wanted kind of like get your boobs out spring break, and the other one wanted like, a nice music festival, and that's where it started to sort of collide when you had...
the fact that the party around the tents was making money and the actual festival wasn't. It's pretty awkward when one friend owns one thing and one owns the other, and I
love that line that was like, we worked out exactly how many days to keep them there to shake every last coin out of their pocket without health and safety becoming an issue. I'm like, Jesus. Anyway,
that's pretty. I mean, it's interesting when you're in the New Zealand music scene and you hit up against the big players in the industry, but you could criticise them, but you've got to also show gratitude to the Eccles of the world or the Campbell Smiths. These people who keep the bigger scale going.
I have no criticism for any of them. I actually had Ian McGann, and
here's another one.
Right. I think I've often gone to big events, festivals, shows, and one of my thoughts is often just marvelling over, man, these are an accomplishment.
Oh yeah,
there's such a level of, especially when they're set up and taken away again.
Yeah, I think in an indie band in the early 2000s, you felt like you were bumping up against something that you couldn't go past. And when you landed at one of their gigs playing support, you were just like the roadies were kind of above you on the list. And I remember turning up to play support for the Shins, and Ruby Sons used to put like fairy lights all over the stage.
Yeah.
And the roadie guys who'd worked these massive gigs and toured overseas with, big New Zealand bands, like Stereogram or whatever, they were just like, oh my God, you're going to put up fairy lights so we have to take down before the main band plays? You've turned up like 10 minutes late to sound check, and so on and so forth. They just really did not like us, and we felt it's like, wow, there's a clash of cultures here. I don't know. The Shins asked us to play. We're friends with them.
You're like, you're sort of like at your light shows at like, flat lounge gig level, and they have to take that down. That we're only up to your second book, so making music in New Zealand. That's a really general title in terms of what is it? What's the thesis? What were you trying to get to the bottom of?
Just expand the understanding. I sort of, the program of music in schools is really great for songwriting and professionalism, but I felt like there was more sort of musicians, straight from the musician's mouth side of the story. So it was almost entirely quotes from musician to try and explain things. And also I felt like people didn't understand APRA and publishing very well, and the fact that there's also recorded music where if you've got songs on radio, you should be signed up with them as well as APRA. So songwriters
it is actually a guidebook. This is your book I'm not too familiar with, as you no doubt.
I should have brought you some copies.
Yeah.
I'll drop you some off later.
Yeah.
For your that one's so out of date now, and I've got lots of them, and it's kind of hard to do too much with it, though the fundamentals of how the legal side of it work are still true.
I'm just thinking that's really funny with a book like that. With technology, you have to be really careful what to include. Like, there's a section on sort of like correct CD burning. It's like, oh, okay. Because I realised when that stopped, when I went and bought my last lot, and I've got 2 spindles of them sitting down there that have been there about 15 years.
Yeah, same. Government departments still sometimes give out data on CDs. So I have a CD drive, USB one that people borrow off me to read government data. But on to making music in New Zealand. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I hoped I could get it into schools a bit more. Someone from the education department wrote me a letter, or wrote the publisher a letter saying, you shouldn't be promoting APRA. You can't tell people to sign to a certain publisher. And I was like, oh my God, APRA isn't a publisher. Like,
no, they're a guarantee you can get any
the publishers work through
Yeah.
APRA or the similar organisation overseas. And it's like, oh my God, you're at the top level of education and music and you don't understand this simple point. You should read the book. Like, I don't know. But I don't know.
No, I know you say I don't know. Everything you're saying has perfect clarity. Yeah, you're sort of trying to assemble at the time in 2005 the way I hear you as a best practice guide to getting somewhere in the industry.
Yeah, well, I try to give a balance of DIY and the more pop industry, and then after that, I did Insights, New Zealand artists talk about creativity, where I was just trying to get beyond music into lots of different... You did,
and the list of people was phenomenal, like the number of people you squeezed into that book. But creativity is one of the most contested words definition-wise in the English language. So what did you learn about creativity?
Well, I was just trying to... I mean, as someone who'd borrowed a dictaphone and borrowed a camera to write my first book, I was interested in that DIY idea. And an original idea for the book was something more to do with creating something from nothing. Like, it was a little bit more about that sort of idea of creativity leading, inspired by the hip-hop idea of, if you want to dance, get a bit of cardboard, dance on the street. Yeah. If you want to make a song, just get a turntable, whatever you've got handy. And so I wanted to put tattoo artists and graffiti artists next to fine artists, and I wanted to meet some of these people. So if I wanted to meet Douglas Wright, it was a great example. Great excuse. Or Dick Frizzell, and
that's what this has been good. This has been good for that.
I wanted to put Dick Frizzell next to Otis Frizzell, or just have a picture of New Zealand music at that arts at that time, and then pick up some people who are maybe we're going to be successful, like Taika Waititi and Brett McKenzie and so forth, and put them all in the same book. And then
did all right there with those choices.
Some of them did okay.
Yeah.
And
probably, and probably like the hip hop book, some of them have sort of not disappeared, but don't have the profile of others.
Or
that's
doing
the joy
more
of a book like that,
And I should give a shout out to my girlfriend at the time, Tosh Arkett, who did some of the interviews and photographs for the book. Though it did make me realise that I'm not that kind of photographer where someone's in front of you and you have to tell them to stand in a certain way or whatever. It was kind of funny, actually. I did that whole book, and my friend Simon Amos designed that one and the Making Music one, and he did a good job with those photos, which were varying amounts of good. And then they put me on the cover of the Sunday magazine that comes from Sunday Star Times, and so I got sent out with a real photographer, like a professional one, who had like a intern with him that was carrying all his gear, and he was just like ordering me around and like, lie on the ground, put your camera here. But so that kind of made me realise what I should have done, probably. And at the Random House Christmas party, I remember a photographer coming up and going, "Your photographs for the hip hop book were great, but your photographs of this latest one are terrible." And I was like,
no.
Thanks.
See, that's what happens.
A couple of beers into
I was going to say, open bar. And then so the New Zealand rock book comes out, and look, I bet you would have been asked this more than once before, but the first thing I saw when I looked at it dates wise is because there was Stranded in Paradise was sort of one of the few books that hung about in the library about New Zealand music for years. Was there sort of a conscious decision to start off roughly where that book ended up? Because I think that one ends in 88 and you started in 87 or something like that. Late 80s.
I mean, that's a decision. Because I could already tell it was going to be too big a subject. Yeah. And then there was the David Eagleton one, is it? What?
I don't know who wrote Stranded in Paradise.
No, John Dix.
John Dix, yeah.
Wrote Stranded in Paradise. But there was another history as well that came out 2002 or something. I think it was David Eagleton.
Yeah.
Oh, man. I can't remember. Give It a Whirl, maybe?
Yeah.
I should look it up. And so you can either try and just cram it all in, and I felt like his one just gave short shrift to a few things, even though it was a great overall coverage.
More like a reference book where you look up certain artists if they get too brief. Yeah,
some of them would be very short. And so I thought, if I can do just after John Dix's book, I can go at the scale he did where you can get a little bit further in. But I mean, it was insane. Like, that was the fourth book I wrote in a period of 5 years.
Yeah, I was
touring the world with the Ruby Sons and the Brunettes. Like, I remember doing an interview when NZ Rock came out, and I was like, had pulled the phone into the bathroom of the manager of the Brunettes in London at, in the middle of the night while all my bandmates were sleeping, trying to do this interview with the Herald back at home. And it's just like, man, I'm really burning the candles at both ends.
So I saw that, because you're sort of your publishing, your main publishing runs, I was looking here, 2004 to 2008, and then obviously concept albums came out after that.
Yeah.
Was it just motivated by this is the next project?
Yeah, I mean, my publisher was always surprised that I actually kept to my deadline, which is like almost unknown, as Dubhead or Alan, who's doing the book on Flying Nun, will know that these things can get pushed out forever and ever. And I wrote a few chapters for Inform, the book Elliot O'Donnell wrote about New Zealand graffiti, which gave me another chance to go to the book awards because that was nominated for award, and gave me the fun experience of being in the audience where they read out the nominees for reviewers of the year or reviewer of the year, and one of them was when they were describing how her reviews were great. They said, her wonderful eviscerating review of Gareth Shute's book, Insights. And I'm like, I'm here. Do you know I'm here? Like, you're saying she wrote a great bad review of my book? Awesome. But full respect to, I think it was Siobhan Harvey, maybe. Full respect to her, because I think often when you write a book, the trouble is the other people reviewing, they often want to write that book like a music writer who's reviewing your music book.
Interesting.
They would have done it differently.
Yeah.
And when in her case, with this creativity book, she was like, I don't want this weird smorgasbord of arts where you're just trying to put them all together and find a theme and a philosophy. I want something more nitty-gritty. Why don't you get more in depth about the creative process? Like, you've just kind of skidded across the surface.
Why don't you write that book, lady?
So she did. That was a great thing. She was like the one time where someone actually criticised me in that way, but then she did go and write her own book about solely New Zealand writers. That was the other weird thing. Her review was just all about the writers in my book, and it's like, the whole point is it's not just writers. Anyway, I can't relitigate this thing, but she wrote a book that was great. Every chapter was like a massive talk with a local writer, so good on her.
Reviewing's a funny one. Like, I went and saw Tricky, must be whenever Tricky was here 9-10 years ago, and admittedly past his sell by date, but then an act coming back can have a really fresh take on what they did, but it was terrible. And I wrote a tongue-in-cheek yet really scathing review, and someone in the comments said something that really stuck out to me, where it's like, reviews perform a function, they're necessary, but that person pointed out to me, like, it's kind of easy for you to say that, like, you wouldn't have paid for a ticket, you didn't get a babysitter like we did. You know what I mean? It's like it's a dark art, but I think if you were hired as an expert to evaluate something, then you can't make that evaluation anything other than but what you see it is.
I mean, it's a fine line. I mean, the danger, I think, is getting too personal, either in the way you're criticizing the person or in the way you're just giving your own feelings and viewpoint without any context or history or sometimes, that's something probably Simon Sweetman is criticized for, and that's why I think people sometimes call him a blogger rather than a reviewer or something like that. Try and make that distinction, which he hates. But I think, I would say to him, why not? If you're a blogger, you're the best music blogger in New Zealand. If you're a music writer, you're one of dozens. Why not?
I think also with that, like if you're
you can be both. He did a book.
If you're if you have a general chip on your shoulder about the world and life, that probably should. I'm not saying this in relation to Simon for a second, but but you shouldn't let that seep into your sort of reviewing of artistic pieces.
I mean, they're just two different kinds of ways of writing.
But again,
about it,
tougher in New Zealand. What I did respect about Simon is having the guts to be so scathing a lot of the time. I think. He's
another one who's put his money where his mouth is and done a book. I mean, that's one of the reasons I always like to be in a band as well as writing about music, is I've kind of got skin in the game and people can make fun of my band if they want to.
And you spend all this time on getting a book ready for publication, research, writing, interviewing, taking photos, considering design, etc., etc., etc. And then, speaking of reviews, the sort of main review on Amazon of your concept albums is some sort of sub-editor you never never asked for.
Well,
and that you replied to your credit. I was quite surprised to see that.
Of
course, there's going to be errors in a book. That
was my fifth book, and I was kind of.
It was like Comic Book Guy. It was like the Who never. He reminded me of he would have sounded like the guy from Family Guy.
Well,
The Simpsons rather. Sorry. Yeah.
I was very careless with the book. It was kind of an experiment in self-publishing and publishing online. I wanted to learn about print on demand and ebooks, and so I just went ahead and wrote one. I found a subject that hadn't been written about, and so I did publish it too soon. I probably should have paid someone to sub-edit it more. If I could have found him, it would have been great. I mean, I did a second edition with photos, and it's kind of unfortunate that the first edition's still on Amazon, and even though I've taken it down, it still kind of lives on. It's kind of, I've learned a lot about that whole.
Well, that's part
thing.
of any process, right?
But it was, it was such an interesting process trying to write a book from scratch, because it is possible to write a book. I mean, Peter McLennan did the same around this time. He did it
self-published.
I Don't Believe You're a Star. I Believe You're a Star, which was just his articles put together, all his best ones.
And he self-published through Amazon, I think, and you...
Yeah, I did a similar, Create Space, kind of, whatever their format is.
It was your first, sorry to cut you off, it was your first book with I guess, a global focus to it, topic-wise. The rest were very much New Zealand focused. Why concept albums? Just something you liked over the years. Something you had some words to.
Well, I mean, like you perceptively said, with every book you have to have a kind of philosophy behind it.
Yeah.
And so, the hip hop one was just making an argument for the importance of hip hop and importance of Polynesian and Maori culture generally, and then the making music one was just don't sit on your laurels. You can do music. Here's some real people. It's very real. It's not something that bizarre people called music stars do. It's actually very down to earth. And then the insights one was putting those different kind of arts together and making a case for kind of creating with whatever you have to hand. And then the NZ Rock one, probably another thing I struggled with about that book, apart from being way overextended and writing a book that was way too long and probably needed to be edited down considerably, was that the kind of story behind it was how New Zealand went from a very interior focused music scene to a very international music scene. But I don't think I tied that thread all the way through the book, so it doesn't have the nice sort of structure that I think the hip hop one had. The story got lost in the crazy, sections where I just covered bands that probably didn't deserve that much. I should have just put a list of band members at the end and just.
So back to how were we tying that into the concept album? Yeah.
So with the concept albums one, the idea I had was that concept albums have been coming back because people keep saying the album is dead from a writer and a consumer standpoint. That might be kind of true, but from an artist standpoint, it's definitely not. People love that idea and have grown up with it, and so all these musicians still want to hold on to it, and the only way to hold on to it is to make a concept album where you just literally can't really understand it without hearing the whole thing. And so,
I was going to try and define the concept album. So to me, it's the sort of like almost, I don't want to say musical-esque, but there's a story or a narrative woven through it all, whether it's characters or situations. So I don't know, something like Ghostface Killer's kind of, I think, like Fish Scale, where it's just all about his life.
Well,
dealing and...
I mean, that's the other thing it gets into, is how tricky the definition is, because
then
a lot of people...
Then you've got all the bloated rock ones we know, like The Wall and Tommy.
I mean, it's very obvious when there's an actual narrative, because then it's clearly a concept album, especially if it goes across every single song on the album. Then it gets close to musical theatre and it's obvious. But there are other ones that are sort of thematic concept albums, but you have to be very careful there, because there's lots of albums that are like breakup albums, but there's so many, it'd be hard to call them concept albums. Like, if it comes too much from the person's own autobiography and it's not turned into any sort of narrative, then I don't think, Blood on the Track should really be a concept album or whatever. Like, it's got to have I kind of said it has to have a concept from outside of music to really be considered a concept album. So love songs are kind of a genre within music, and so an album of love songs isn't really a concept album. It's too... It would be too meaningless. You'd lose any meaning of what concept albums is.
It's good. They've got a more firm history in some genres than others. Like, I think big kind of rock of a certain era, metal, hip hop. There's a lot of concept albums in metal, isn't there? I'm trying to think what I think of as a concept album.
Well, at risk of boring people to death, the brief history would be, in the late 60s, it was kind of that psychedelic and experimental era when, people were doing Tommy, and there was so much music in the money in the music industry that you could do things like Tommy the movie, and then like Listomania after that. And so, and it reached its peak with The Wall and the insanity around that. I mean, that was an album before a movie, so it's definitely a concept album.
Yeah.
And then that was so big and so popular that people were like, this is just pretentious claptrap. Like, there was a real move against it. I mean, punk was at the same time as Pink Floyd, but actually it took a long time to come through the culture, and I think it was more probably the pop of the 80s and New Romantics and stuff that killed the concept album. But even though it seemed to die, it kind of took refuge in metal music, and so in the late 80s and 90s they really tapped into concept albums, and there were just a huge amount. And then with hip-hop albums, I think of concept albums because of stuff like the skits woven throughout, Yeah, well, I think when hip-hop grew to a certain level, it had been around a while, like late 90s, early 2000s, that was just the natural thing to try and go a bit further, and you get like the Del the Funky Homo Sapien, Deltron 2000, the Streets kind of did story kind of ones. There's quite a few interesting albums.
Did you go to the Wu-Tang show?
No, I missed that one.
I just, you never know whether everyone's going to turn up, but apparently they all did, and it was freaking amazing, and I feel like I should have gone, because I'd imagine
I feel like that again all the time now. It's funny to think back.
I feel like this now. I go, this is another one. I go, wait, what? That happened last week? I didn't even hear about that. I mean, I heard about that beforehand, but that's my level of... But then there isn't posters up for everything all the time.
It's always just a question of how much the act that you wanted to see 10, 15 years ago, are they going to match your expectations and you're going to satisfy the teenager within, or are they going to ruin your fond memories of this act from your childhood?
And touring international hip-hop artists have a notoriously patchy history in terms of, will everyone make it? It's just part of that game,
Yeah, or will they care? Like, will you get a feeling that they're really there? I mean, when I was very young, I went to a show which was like Jerry Lee Lewis, Bo Diddley, and like Chuck Berry and
What are you,
the Everly Brothers
70?
playing together. Yeah, like as old people.
Yeah.
And so that's like this crazy thing that happened. I must have been so young. I guess it was late 80s at the Mount Smart Supertop.
Amazing.
And but the best out of them was Bo Diddley. I mean, I went away from that a convert of Bo Diddley, and you know, some of my songs still have like a Bo Diddley beat in The Conjurers or Fever Party, and those other people just dialing it in, and it's like, is this really like satisfying anything? Is it like great to tick this off that I've seen him, or is it sad?
I know exactly what you're saying. The best way I've heard it described is someone described it to me as like when an artist turns into like a Vegas cabaret act version of themselves.
Yeah.
Or like what you phoning it in, the same thing you said, same idea. Well, apparently they didn't, and they were very good, and I'd imagine seeing them at the Sydney Opera House would have been pretty amazing as well.
Yeah.
Like concept albums to Wu-Tang. Hey, I think we've talked for nearly an hour and 20 minutes.
Okay, let's call it. I think we've done it all. So
I think we have. What's up for the rest of your Sunday? You've got the whole day ahead of you, Gareth. I'm just looking at the clock down here.
Not much.
Good.
Probably just go and actually read a book and
Nice.
take it easy and try and stay away from computers.
Okay.
That's
Cheers,
summer.
mate.